I think the sort of key answer to that really is that it's obviously important to all marketing channels. The thing that's most exciting about social media for sponsorship is that if you look at how and why people use social media and the content that they share and consume through it, you see that an awful lot of that is based around their interests and their passions. So you have huge communities of people having conversations, is the term that we all use, but engaging with each other and with content around their interests, and that is obviously the sort of the essence of sponsorship as a marketing channel. It's about helping brands engage with audiences via their passions. It's a really good question. I think we're often sort of asked first, should I be on Facebook? Should I be on Twitter? Can you build me a Pinterest account? That kind of thing. And we normally sort of take a step back. The big step back is to think about why consumers actually use social media in the first place. What motivates them to be using this new, in inverted commas, opportunity in such huge numbers and in such big ways. And it can get quite deep and academic, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs reminds us that human beings have this desire to belong to communities of people like them, and that is pretty close to eating and drinking and being safe and secure in your life as a human motivation. When we look at how people use social media, quite often the motivation is simply to articulate and secure a belonging to a community of people like them. So content becomes this tool for them to express who they are, affirm who they are, what their identity is, and through that and as part of that belong to a group of people. So when you start talking about channels, you often see that consumers are not particularly motivated by the particular platform within social media. It's more about the content and how different platforms can help them become a part of different communities. So we normally encourage a brand to look at where their audience is across that social web, and that includes both sort of social graph platforms like Facebook and interest graph platforms, which incidentally are particularly interesting to sponsorship because they're networks of people who may not necessarily know each other, but they have come together around a shared passion. So we encourage them to find the audiences in the numbers that they need to reach, and then think about creating content that often can be shared across and migrate across those different platforms. So simply put, create a piece of content that can easily be shared across different platforms. So we find, unsurprisingly, sort of movies and photography are particularly powerful formats, if you like, of content because they can so easily fly across different platforms. So we're moving from an era where people were thinking social media is about me opening up a Facebook page and building a Twitter feed, to it being much more about content that is nomadic and can move across different platforms. And that, if you like, enables them to a brand to have their brand story, brand proposition reach further more easily off the back of a natural desire to share. Yeah, in terms of examples, it might be interesting to take two brands that are in a similar sort of sector and are actually involved in a similar sponsorship territory. So two brands that are both involved in finance and money and investment, and are both partly involved from a sponsorship point of view in rugby, as it happens. One brand is all about unlocking information that empowers their customer and enables their customer to feel more closely connected to something. So knowledge is power, power is opportunity, and opportunity for that particular brand is where the revenue comes from. The other brand is all about, brand proposition is all about character and reminding people that they are a brand that has a strong, credible personality. So the former brand that is all about unlocking information uses social media as a way of unlocking information in different formats about their particular sponsorship. So in the week they produce films that get fans closer to and understanding better the club that they support, and at weekends on match day they use Facebook and Twitter to publish real-time in-play content that helps their customers, and in this case the fans of this particular team, understand what's going on in that game better through very, very technical and very, very rich information that you can't get anywhere else. The other brand that's all about character uses a much richer and less frequent content strategy, where you're talking about big, strong films that draw out stories of character from the particular property that they are sponsors of, and those films are then broadcast and shared through various social channels, including the channel owned by the rights holder in that particular instance. We encourage these rights holders to start developing social assets, so products that they may have built into their Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and Pinterest accounts and all of that kind of thing. Products that are ready to go and ready to be sponsored. Brands will always, I think, have a desire to go off and create their own content. There's that kind of feeling of kind of ownership and bespokeness around what you're doing. But I certainly think that there are digital assets that rights holders should be working to create, and we see an increased desire amongst brands for rights holders to be offering up, as part of a sponsorship rights package, digital assets that go beyond banners on websites and places to stick your logo. It's difficult for rights holders because they need to see the traction there and the interest from the brands, but as with everything, I think, innovation and being proactive usually pays off, and is certainly a way to learn what your customer, in this case the sponsor as the customer for the rights holder, wants and values and needs. And I think they'd be surprised to see that a lot of these products that they could create need not be particularly expensive. Yeah, it can be a whole huge range of things. I saw a rights holder the other day produce an app that sat within Facebook, and a fan of that page, of that Facebook page, could use that app to create their own highlights reel from the games that had taken place over the previous week. So you as a fan could build your own highlights show reel of 2 minutes long. It could become automatically branded up with your name, as though it was your personal choice of what was great that week, and then you share that piece of content with all of your friends. So it appeals to all of the little touch points that make this sort of stuff work. It gives you something that you can show you get that world, and you understand that world, and you have knowledge of that world. Then you produce something that is visually appealing, i.e. a short piece of video, and you share it because it says, this is who I am, this is what I get, this is what I know, I am a supporter of X team. So that's one example. Other examples could be much more practical things. I've heard football clubs talk in the past about apps that might sit on a website that might help fans know what the parking conditions are like around their club, or the travel conditions around their club, and tap into that and then share that with their friends. So sometimes they can be extremely practical and quite dry digital products that may appeal to a certain brand for a certain reason. The list goes on and on and on, and I think that's one of the points. There's an opportunity for a huge amount of creativity in this space, and perhaps controversially, I tend to think that creativity in the world of sponsorship has not been that great. It's been too easy to survive and trade off the back of the volume of an audience that is engaged in a particular passion. Digital is challenging sponsorship, social is challenging sponsorship, both on the rights holder side and the brand side, to be more creative. And surprise, surprise, it comes back to fundamental marketing necessities. The first one being understand who you are trying to engage with in a particular context, understand what they want and what they care about before you start coming up with ideas. What I do think is interesting is that the idea of rights and the idea of social media in some ways jar. And I don't think they need to jar in a way that is negative and kind of stifling. But I do think it asks more of rights holders to become more open. So for example, at the moment, rights holders may see unofficial social media communities that gather around a particular passion or their passion as a threat. I think there's a strong argument that they need to start seeing them as opportunities and as communities that they should work with and engage with and even share with. And that's because the consumer increasingly doesn't care as much where stuff comes from. They are grabbing all of this content that sits around their passion, taking it in, filtering out what's interesting to them, sharing what's interesting to them. And so I think a rights holder needs to think a bit more like that. The positive thing, I think, for the rights holder is that, again, ironically, them having official and often exclusive access to certain types of content is something that they should perhaps work harder to make more of in the social space. And the final point is on data, which is, as we all know, a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Social data, i.e. the data that sits behind all of the interactions that take place on social media, that is going to be of increasingly massive value to brands for all sorts of reasons. We all know that the sort of the data conversations and hype that's out there at the moment. But you can imagine the sponsorship agency of the future, and I'm talking 10, 15 years down the line perhaps, morphing into one that is more actually about gathering social data for brands by creating content and experiences in the digital space that generate really rich, interesting data for a sponsor or for a rights holder. So we may well see sports clubs in the future making more money out of selling data than they do out of selling tickets. Who knows? But the data thing is interesting and something to keep an eye on, I think.